Hello and welcome to the 2021 Mayor's Summit Against Anti-Semitism, hosted by the city of Frankfurt am Main and in partnership with the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement. I'm Narit Ben. It is a pleasure to have you all with us today.
And I'm Natasha Kirchak. Today you're taking part in a truly groundbreaking event. The issue of anti-Semitism is often thought of at the national and international levels, but it's on the streets of cities around the world where its effects are primarily felt and where it must be confronted. That's why mayors and other local officials have a leading role to play in this fight against anti-Semitism.
Right, and coming up, we'll be hearing from mayors of cities large and small on their efforts to quell anti-Semitism and promote religious tolerance and interfaith harmony. During our opening plenary session and the panel discussions to follow, these mayors and other top officials will break down common challenges, share best practices, create channels of collaboration, and brainstorm innovative new ideas on how to actually turn the tide against rising hate. It's all about practical solutions. Partner organizations who helped make this summit possible include the Jewish Federations of North America, B'nai B'rith International, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs from Canada, the Maccabi World Union, and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you for being here for the launch of this new global network of municipal leaders who are committed to pushing back against religious prejudice of all forms. And please, remember, if you miss anything or have to step away for a moment, a recording of the entire event will be uploaded and made available for online viewing tomorrow on the summit's website and on the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's social media platforms. And with that, we're now going to go to Combat Anti-Semitism Executive Director Sasha Dratwa-Reutman for a welcoming statement. Sasha?
Dear mayors, speakers, and friends, I would like, first of all, to thank you, everyone who take the time to be with us today, and to share their own experience dealing with anti-Semitism. I would like especially to thank Frankfurt am Main Mayor, who is here today, for hosting this event, hosting all of us in his cities. So thank you for hosting us digitally, and hopefully next year we'll meet in person. We are deeply appreciative of all the work you do to fight anti-Semitism and for your leadership creating this wonderful summit. In recent years, we have been working with national and global decision makers to promote policies to combat anti-Semitism and end Jew hatred everywhere. As we did so, we identified gaps between global policies and their implementation on the ground. That is why we are coming together here today to empower those who are seeking to close these gaps and gain new unique perspective on the collective efforts to eliminate Jew hatred from the planet. We hope you will come away from today's summit with innovative ideas, strategies, programs to protect and enrich the life of all the members of your communities, including Jews. Please count on us, the CAM Coalition, of more than 300 partner organizations and 300,000 individuals to work together to support your actions. So thank you everyone for being with us today. We look forward for future cooperations.
And with that, I'm now honored to introduce the man you just heard about, formerly co-host of today's summit, a prominent European voice against anti-Semitism, Mayor of Frankfurt am Main, Uwe Becker, for his opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, mayors, municipal representatives, members of governments, institutions, and organizations, I very warmly welcome you in the name of the city of Frankfurt to this 2021 Mayor Summit Against Anti-Semitism. I would have loved to welcome you here personally in the beautiful Imperial Hall of the City Hall of Frankfurt, but I'm thankful to Combat Anti-Semitism that they have made it possible to organize this important conference online. 76 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, we see a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism all around the world, in Europe, and unfortunately also here in Germany. We see hatred and incitement of the people on the streets and places of our cities. We see it in the internet and in social media. The diversity and colorfulness of our societies has not erased the hate against Jews. But anti-Semitism has become diverse itself, And it's not an abstract threat. It takes place in the cities, towns, and councils all around the world. From the far right, where it still shows its ugly face of racism, and from where it walks in its marching boots, to the more left intellectual anti-Semitism, which comes over the detour over anti-Zionism, over cultural influence anti-Semitism, to the hatred against the state of Israel. So it's up to us to fight against this toxic spirit that is poisoning the ground on which our societies are built upon. The diversity of today's anti-Semitism needs much more complex approaches from education, from remembrance culture, and an emotional-oriented approach in teaching the crimes of the Shoah and the evolutional path of anti-Semitism in history, to a clear and uncompromising fight against all forms of anti-Semitism with law enforcement, legislative, and practical instruments. If it's the swastika that is painted on the walls of a synagogue, if it's the word Jew misused as a swear word on schoolyards, or the attack against a rabbi by a far right-wing terrorist, or the anti-Semitic activities of the BDS movements on campus grounds or on our marketplaces in our cities, we have to fight those forms of hatred against Jews, not only when they take place, but also when we see them at the horizon. When Jews, when our citizens ask themselves if they will have a safe and secure future in our cities, when boys don't like to wear the kippot and decide to wear the baseball cap, when girls hide the Star of David on their necklace and their pullover because they don't want to show it on their ride with the subway, then it's not 5 to 12, but 10 past 12, and we have to push back today's level of anti-Semitism. So it's up to us to act. And now, before we start our plenary session, let me show you a very special hall in our city hall. It is a place that is closer linked to the conference issue of today, like no other hall in any other city hall around the world probably is. And now we are in the plenary hall, the seat of the Frankfurt City Parliament. And this is really a very special place. While after World War II in Nuremberg, justice was spoken very fast on the war crimes that took place in World War II, it needed nearly another 20 years before Germany started to reflect on the terrible crimes in the time of the Holocaust, the mass murder of 6 million Jews in Europe. And here, Fritz Bauer, the former state attorney, brought together all the different trials. And there were 366 people witnessing, of whom 211 were the survivors of Auschwitz. So here the first Auschwitz trial began. And if we look straight across the street towards the other side, we see Paulskirche, the cradle of German democracy. It was where in 1848 the first German National Assembly took place, and they strongly debated the implementation of the basic human rights. They failed at that time by the implementation, but Germany after World War II was built upon these principles. And so today it's up to us, if we lead our societies into the light, or if we let others push them into the dark. And for that reason, we have to fight against all forms of anti-Semitism. If it comes from the far right, if it's the left-oriented anti-Zionism, if it's from people who are socialized by hating Jews, or those who have blind hate against the state of Israel. So now, let us start with our plenary and the upcoming panel discussions.
And for being an invaluable ally in the fight against Jew hatred, and of course for playing a key role in making this summit right here possible. From there, we're going to move on to the United States. In October of 2018, the worst ever act of violence against U.S. Jews unfolded at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 11 worshipers massacred by a white supremacist gunman. Since this horrific attack, Pittsburgh became a sort of symbol of resilience. And with us today is the city's mayor, William Peduto. Mayor Peduto, share with us some of your insights on overcoming this kind of tragedy.
And thank you for putting this.
It looks like we're having a bit of a sound issue. We'll have him soon.
We'll get back with him in a moment. And before we move on from there to Brussels, Natasha, the point of this whole thing really, as we mentioned, is practical, because a lot of the conversations about anti-Semitism in general are on a sort of macro level. They're all about maybe only the definition of anti-Semitism or statistics, but this is all about really talking to the people who are change makers, who are doing things on the ground, and actually hear from them what they can do to make practical change on the ground. So with that, let's talk to someone who, as we mentioned, has some very real world, and I have to say horrific experience with this, and that's Mayor William Peduto. So share with us again some of your experience, your insights from overcoming the tragedy that we saw in Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me now. Great. I can tell you.
I think you might be on mute, as happens.
No?
Okay, go ahead.
No. I can tell you firsthand what it is like dealing with anti-Semitism. I never expected that my city would be referred to as the city of the most horrific anti-Semitic crime in the United States. But I remember hearing those words as I was traveling to the hospital that morning. It was a cold October morning. It was raining. I was at the site within minutes, actually arriving before SWAT even got there. I live only 5 blocks from the Tree of Life Synagogue. And my chief of staff lives even closer. So we were there standing outside as the event was unfolding. And Pittsburgh's a tight-knit community. So we knew that not only would we know people who were victims, but in the case of my chief of staff, there'd be relatives. As we stood there, about an hour into the event, I looked across the street and I saw a friend of mine named Wazi Muhammad. And Wazi was standing there in the rain, and I crossed the street and I went up to him and I asked, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "We had to be here." And as I looked, I saw around Wazi was the Islamic Center's executive board. The Islamic Center is multinational. It represents the Muslim community in Pittsburgh. They were having their meeting that morning when they heard the news, and they traveled directly to the site. What that showed to me during that awful day was light. And the only way that you beat darkness is with light. The only way that you beat hate is with love. And the only way that you're able to do that is by building in for years a true feeling of community. So in Pittsburgh, we are very proud of our interfaith community. Christians, Muslims, and Jews working together in order to be able to find ways to bring about peace in our own community. And it's only through that type of a cooperation that you see something like that occur on a day when a city is brought to its knees. The trauma of that incident affected everybody. And what everyone in Pittsburgh understood, that is an attack against one, is an attack against all of us. And as we stood there that morning in that cold, rainy October, we realized that the only way that we would get past this event is if we had the ability to lean on one another. The Muslim community was joined by the Christian community and every community across Pittsburgh in being there for our Jewish neighbors and understanding that when we say never again, it means never again.
Thanks so much for that. Really a, albeit horrific, but excellent example of how anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem, and the solution has to involve something that is so much wider in so many different parts of the community, which is exactly what you guys did there. Mayor Peduto, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
All right. The Belgian capital of Brussels is a multicultural city that's also sadly experienced violence targeting Jews in recent years, most notably the shooting at the Jewish Museum there in 2014. Well, we're now going to hear from Brussels Mayor Philippe Clos about his city's efforts to combat hatred.
Chers collègues, je vous remercie de l'attention que vous portez au sujet de l'inquiétante résurgence de l'antisémitisme en Europe. Comme d'autres villes en Europe, Bruxelles a déploré ces dernières années une hausse des agressions antisémites, dont la plus meurtrière fut l'attentat perpétré le 24 mai 2014 contre le musée juif de Belgique, où 4 personnes ont perdu la vie. Bruxelles est une ville cosmopolite et un carrefour de culture. Cela fait partie de son identité. On recense en effet 184 nationalités chez nous, c'est-à-dire presque tous les États représentés à l'ONU. Cela signifie qu'outre son statut de capitale de l'Union européenne, Bruxelles est la chambre d'écho des passions politiques internationales et des drames du monde. Les 10 000 citoyens bruxellois de confession ou de culture juive sont ainsi souvent la cible de ceux qui prétendent critiquer de cette façon la politique de l'État d'Israël. Je regrette en ce sens vivement que 81% des Juifs de Belgique considèrent l'espace public comme une menace pour leur sécurité. L'indispensable protection policière de synagogues, d'écoles, de centres culturels juifs témoigne d'une menace réelle. Bien sûr, l'antisémitisme a plusieurs visages. Celui d'aujourd'hui n'a plus grand-chose à voir avec l'antijudaïsme qui s'est exprimé en 1370 à Bruxelles avec la légende de la soi-disant profanation des hosties du Vendredi Saint. Mais à l'auberge antisémite, chacun apporte ses haines et ses ressentiments particuliers, qu'ils soient d'inspiration religieuse, politique ou culturelle. Il y a eu par exemple récemment ces chants de supporters de football promettant les camps de la mort aux Juifs. Je pense également aux infâmes caricatures antisémites du carnaval d'Alost, qui lui a valu d'être retiré de la liste du patrimoine immatériel de l'humanité de l'UNESCO. Il y a toujours ces histrions d'extrême droite, qui ailleurs sont déjà repassés à l'acte. Comme autorité locale, nous voulons déconstruire ces stéréotypes qui prospèrent sur la vague complotiste actuelle par la pédagogie, le débat, la réflexion et les actions de sensibilisation. Car s'il cesse de penser, chaque être humain peut agir en barbare, nous avait prédit Hannah Arendt. L'éducation à la citoyenneté, la vigilance de nos agents de prévention à l'égard de signaux de radicalisation, l'aménagement de l'espace public comme lieu de rencontre pour tout le monde, sans exclusive, la mixité sociale et la lutte contre l'enclavement des populations économiquement fragiles dans des quartiers. Tout cela fait partie de l'arsenal de mesures pour abaisser les tensions communautaires et permettre la cohabitation à l'heure où chaque individu revendique haut et fort sa singularité, ses identités souvent plurielles et son appartenance religieuse ou culturelle. Mais je veux être clair, cela passe également par une répression ferme de tout acte antisémite commis sur le territoire. Je voudrais à ce propos revenir sur le musée juif de Belgique, qui a été ouvert en 2005, au cœur de Bruxelles, avec une ambition pédagogique visant la diversité des publics, la cohésion sociale et le dialogue interculturel. L'attaque terroriste de 2014 qui a fauché des vies et dont l'auteur a été récemment condamné à la prison à perpétuité visait aussi le symbole que représente ce lieu fédérateur ouvert à l'altérité. D'importants travaux de rénovation et d'extension vont être faits afin de porter la fréquentation de ce musée de 30 000 visiteurs à 100 000 visiteurs. La réouverture est prévue pour 2025. La pédagogie consiste encore à transmettre la mémoire dans des cérémonies en espace public. Par exemple, la déclamation, dans le cadre du 75e anniversaire de la libération de Bruxelles, du nom des 1751 Justes de Belgique qui, au risque de leur vie, ont aidé des Juifs à échapper aux griffes de l'occupant nazi. Je pense encore aux pavés de la mémoire, incrustés sur nos trottoirs bruxellois, au seuil des maisons où des Juifs ont été raflés durant la Seconde Guerre mondiale pour être envoyés vers les camps de la mort. L'identité bruxelloise, comme vous l'aurez compris, est multiple. L'identité juive est partie intégrante de l'ADN de Bruxelles. Nous n'y renoncerons jamais.
Thank you, Mayor Clos, for your dedication to interfaith coexistence and your solidarity with the Jewish people in the fight against anti-Semitism. It's clear that you are doing everything possible. All right, we are now turning to Latin America, and more specifically Argentina, which is home to the region's largest Jewish community. The chief of government of the city of Buenos Aires, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, is with us to say a few words.
Hola, soy Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, alcalde de la ciudad de Buenos Aires. Es un honor para mí poder participar de la cumbre de alcaldes contra el antisemitismo. Aprovecho para saludar a mis colegas que participan en este evento y para felicitar al alcalde de Frankfurt, Uwe Becker, por esta importante iniciativa. La lucha contra toda forma de discriminación y violencia es una política pública sostenida de hace muchísimos años en Buenos Aires. Somos una ciudad de puertas abiertas, construida por inmigrantes de más de 50 colectividades que día a día hacen su aporte para que Buenos Aires siga siendo una de las ciudades más vibrantes y dinámicas de la región. La convivencia en la diversidad es parte de nuestra identidad y desde el gobierno trabajamos día a día para construir una sociedad más plural, diversa y libre de prejuicios. Sin embargo, en estos tiempos difíciles de pandemia, notamos con preocupación el aumento de la intolerancia y la violencia en todo el mundo. El antisemitismo, la xenofobia y el racismo son una amenaza continua a nuestras sociedades. Es fundamental que sigamos trabajando en la prevención de la discriminación, promoviendo el pluralismo, valorando la diversidad y generando conciencia sobre las horribles consecuencias de la intolerancia. Por eso esta cumbre es tan importante. Sigamos construyendo un mundo más justo, pacífico e inclusivo, en el que todas las personas podamos vivir tranquilas y desarrollar con toda libertad nuestro proyecto de vida. Un saludo.
Salud. Thank you, Mr. Larreta, for your efforts to promote pluralism in your city. Nurit?
And from there, I now have the honor of introducing the Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency, Vera Jourova. Ms. Jourova, give us your take on the fight against anti-Semitism from a grander sort of pan-European perspective.
Honorable Mayor Becker, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure to join you for this Mayor Summit against anti-Semitism. A special thanks goes to Mayor Uwe Becker for hosting the event. My thanks also goes to Combat Anti-Semitism movement for bringing us together. In the last 2 years, you have managed to bring together state and civil society actors from around the globe and rally them around one common goal: to roll back anti-Semitism and to ensure safety for Jewish communities. Racism in all its forms, including anti-Semitism, is on the rise in several EU member states. On anti-Semitism specifically, according to the overview on anti-Semitism published by the Fundamental Rights Agency in September 2020, more than 3,000 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded across the EU in 2019. Given that we know from the survey that underreporting is at 70 to 80%, these figures are only the tip of the iceberg. Anti-Semitism needs a holistic response, where the European, national and local level work hand in hand. Last December, the EU took a major step forward in the fight against anti-Semitism when the Council adopted a declaration on mainstreaming anti-Semitism across policy areas, ranging from security to areas like education, integration, and Holocaust remembrance. You can count on the European Commission to remain committed to fight anti-Semitism. I have personally made it a top priority during my term in office. Anti-Semitism is not only a problem for the Jewish people, it is a problem for the European society as a whole. I am pleased to see concrete actions taken on combating anti-Semitism at national and local level. 15 EU member states are in the process of adoption or have already adopted a national strategy or dedicated actions on combating anti-Semitism. To complement member states' efforts, the European Commission will present a first-ever comprehensive European strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life at the end of this year. I would like to stress that public denial and distortion of the Holocaust, whether digitally or physically, in a manner to incite to violence or hatred is criminalized at EU level. We will present this year an initiative to extend the list of so-called Eurocrimes to hate crime and hate speech. In addition, the Digital Services Act will ensure greater transparency on how online platforms moderate content and on algorithmic processes. Last month, the Commission launched the campaign Protect the Facts, together with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, UNESCO and the UN, to raise awareness on the importance of recognizing and countering Holocaust distortion. In closing, let me say, if you want to effectively fight anti-Semitism, you first need to define it. The Commission joined the IHRA as permanent international partner in 2018 and has been using the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism as a basis for its work, following requests by member states. The Commission, together with the IHRA, published in January 2021 a comprehensive handbook for the practical use of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, with over 30 good practices from several different countries and policy fields. It will support municipalities, national authorities and civil society organizations in recognizing and addressing anti-Semitism. The IHRA definition has also been adopted by many European cities, like Berlin, Vienna, Munich, recently Paris and Nice. I hope many other cities will join them.
Thank you, Vice President Jourova, for those remarks, and especially for reiterating the European Commission's commitment to fighting anti-Semitism.
And with that, we're turning to Albania. Jews in Albania were protected during the Holocaust, and the country is known as a diverse haven of religious coexistence. Well, next on the stage with us is the mayor of the Albanian capital of Tirana, Erion Veliaj. So, Mayor Veliaj, as you know, Albania has a unique story to tell when it comes to its relations with Jewish people. Most notably, it's a Muslim-majority country that was one of the few places in Europe where Jews were safe during the Holocaust. Can you reflect a bit for us on this past? And, of course, tell us about Tirana's historic role as a safe haven for Jews?
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Mayor Becker, for hosting such a wonderful digital event. I'm so proud to be the mayor of Tirana. It's the city that I think stands for coexistence and stands for solidarity. In terms of numbers, Albania had 10 times more Jews at the end of the war than at the beginning of the war. So it became a haven for the Jewish populations across the Balkans, but also the transit route where many leading Jewish activists would take Albanian passports and then travel on to the United States or other safe havens. And you'd think there was a large Jewish community here. No, it was actually mostly people of other religions, such as Muslims, Catholics, and Orthodox. And the reason it makes me very proud to be a mayor of such a city is that the code of honor called BESA, which is the code of protecting your guest, of looking out for your neighbor as if he was representative of God, is so instilled in our society. So sometimes I appreciate all the initiatives of the European Commission, but sometimes it's not only about what is forbidden, it's also about what is promoted. And in this city, we promote this story quite a bit. So we make sure it's in the textbooks. I make sure personally that I go and visit the descendants of these families from the city, and we tell the story. It's not important just to make the story happen. It's also important to keep telling the story and find pride. This is also the country of Mother Teresa. So we have deep roots in showing solidarity. And quite frankly, being a small country, or being pushed around and invaded and are under occupation, we know very well how it feels to be under duress and to be under persecution. And quite frankly, our story has inspired other stories, like the story of Mother Teresa. So we make sure we reverberate and we echo the story across the city. I make sure that every month, one of the families is either hosted in the city and we televise it, and we want to make sure that people find out how the local oculist protected dozens of Jews and gave them names of his sons and sent them to remote villages until they were rehabilitated and then sent off to other locations. So once people realized that someone who lived in their neighborhoods across the corner from their street was actually such a hero, they also take pride in belonging to such a city. So I think promoting the story and making sure that our future generations transfer this code of honor of treating the guests as if they are God is very important to the legacy of our city.
Well, I mean, that's beautiful to hear. Today, you mentioned this, your city is seen as a bastion of religious tolerance. And you also mentioned how you're working to promote interfaith ties. But can you tell us as mayor what else you're trying to do?
Well, you know, we want to make sure that the city's landmarks also reflect this legacy. So I was very happy with our Israeli and American friends. We just revealed in Tirana a beautiful landmark, the Holocaust Memorial. But also in a place where we had no loss of life from our Jewish friends, brothers, and sisters. And the fact that the city is also acupunctured with these memorials, and we're marking the homes of people who actually stood out and became haven of salvation, is very, very important and critical to our city infrastructure. We also want to make sure that we celebrate city connections. And I know big government is important, and I know diplomacy does its work, but the work that we do with the city of Tel Aviv, and the work we do with the city of Haifa, and the work we do with the city of Jerusalem, and sort of these people-to-people connections are very important. So what we do is we encourage these frequent excursions where these families not only have reunited, but they frequently visit each other between Albania and Israel or other parts of the world, you know, as far as Argentina or the United States. And I think to usher and treat these special guests who come and visit the place where their grandparents were saved and make them beautiful city events is extremely important. And my last note, next year, Tirana will be European Youth Capital. And we want to make sure that a good chunk of our over 1,000 events for the European Youth Capital also celebrate the city's diversity, the city's history of saving the Jews, and also this code of honor, Besa, of treating your guest who is entrusted into your home as if he was a representative of God in your own home.
All right, well, it looks like you're very hard at work, Mayor Veliaj, and another reason to come and visit the beautiful Tirana.
Such a great example of integrating history into present day and actually trying to make a big change with education, which is something that we don't see too much.
Absolutely. Really no, it was very fascinating to hear from you. Now, we are turning to Greece. Greece has a rich Jewish history dating back millennia. We're privileged to say hello now to the mayor of the Greek capital of Athens, Kostas Bakoyannis. So, Mayor Bakoyannis, welcome. Athens is a large city with a small Jewish minority. As mayor, what can be done to both secure and foster Jewish life in Greece's capital city? Could you unmute yourself there? Because I don't think we can hear you. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. So start over, because we didn't hear the beginning.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for the invitation. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to join you. Let me start with a historic fact. Judaism as a culture and as a religion and Hellenism have peacefully coexisted for centuries in a symbiosis. Indeed, there is evidence of a Jewish community in Athens as far back as the 1st century AD. And Jewish people are a valued part of Athens' past, present, and in its future. Unfortunately, the size of the community has yet to recover from the tragedy that was the Holocaust, which saw tragically staggering numbers of Greek Jews perish. And the destruction of these communities had a devastating effect to the Greek and to the Athenian civilization, leaving behind a space that cannot be filled. However, and I should like to underline this, the modern time Jewish community of Athens, whatever it may lack in numbers, it surely makes up with their important contribution in arts, academia, and science, amongst others. And that continued dynamism, even in the face of adversity, makes me believe that Jewish life in Athens will flourish once more. So moving forward, we aim to highlight and celebrate the rich history of the Jewish community and actively discourage any form of discrimination that may lead to alienation. Any attempt to weaponize the Holocaust against the Jewish community is met with incisive and immediate action. Mutual respect is the basis of any democracy. And as cities, we are called upon to foster an environment of peaceful coexistence and mutual understanding. All our citizens, regardless of their background, need the sense of safety and normality in their everyday lives, and we, as cities, are called upon to provide just that.
Speaking of safety, you know, in recent years, there have been a number of anti-Semitic graffiti incidents targeting the Jewish community in Athens. What do you attribute these incidents to, and what action should be taken to prevent similar events like this in the future?
Well, sadly, there have been some incidents that have upset us all. But I would like to underline that these anti-Semitic incidents may well be the result of radicalization in certain communities, but they do not in any way reflect an increase in negative attitudes toward Jews in the population as a whole. Now, regarding these truly disgraceful anti-Semitic graffiti incidents, we addressed these vandalisms straight away. We cleaned up the graffiti. We reaffirmed our stance of vigilance against racism. But it's not just about reactive measures. We believe in a proactive approach based on the development of a culture of education on the subject that may work more slowly, but is more effective in the long run. Education, as you all mentioned before, plays an important role in addressing and overcoming prejudice and countering social discrimination. Historically, anti-Semitism has been linked with misinformation, lies, propaganda, and populist practices. Full-on denial of the Holocaust may not be as common nowadays, but what does remain present and may indeed be more pervasive are attempts at revision of history, attempts to retell, distort, and repurpose these horrible events of human suffering. And we are working very hard to ensure that our green cities policies and initiatives have a positive impact in social cohesion and mutual understanding. And to be practical, as we speak, we intend to organize a series of seminars and workshops on religious anti-Semitism, along with the Chief Rabbinate of Athens and the Department of Social Sociology and the Study of Religion of the University of Athens. It will focus on local communities, and it will examine how anti-Semitism has persisted throughout history and how it has evolved over time, over place and over culture. And among the participants will, of course, be the staff of the municipality and the municipal police. And we are also preparing the installation of a comprehensive educational exhibition on the experience of Greeks in Nazi concentration camps, with the recreation of the Birkenau gas chamber, among other things, honoring the stories of the people who suffered this truly abhorrent treatment. And it should not be up to this discriminated against to correct this kind of behavior. We all need to create a wall against those who foster the hatred and divisive actions that cause discrimination. We need to hold a mirror to prejudice and to expose its detrimental effect to the entirety of society. Now, although the resilience and effectiveness of false news is alarming, I truly believe that if we let it out, the truth can and shall shine brighter and lead us to unity.
Well, education. It's clear that that is, what is so key here. And it's very interesting that you're choosing to educate municipal leaders, not just society. Very interesting. Thank you, Mayor.
Educate the educators.
Educate the educators. Thank you so much, Mayor. All right, Nulit.
Well, let's move on to one more place that has a very rich Jewish history. Before the Holocaust, the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius was a vibrant center of Jewish life, even earning the nickname Jerusalem of the North. We now welcome Vilnius Mayor Remigijus Šimašius to speak, and I'll pass it over to you. We'll get you in one moment. If you could unmute yourself, this is the sort of defining characteristic of the last year for all of us, the word unmute. Go ahead.
Okay. So,
there we go.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me, of course, to be among such a great leaders of good cities who do fight anti-Semitism, because I do feel that this is our duty. But for Vilnius, you know, I feel that in our city and for us, it's even a bigger duty because than for majority of even European cities because of certain reasons. Because you know, we were a big Jewish city for 600 years. And it has, again, flourishing Jewish culture, and first and the most important interpreter of Talmud, Gaon of Vilna, lived in Vilnius. It was a big religious center of Judaism. But of course, we lost all of it during the 20th century. Before World War II, 40% of Vilnius citizens were Jewish. 90% of them were killed. And many repressed also by Soviets, not only by Nazis. And cultural heritage was also destroyed, first of all by Nazis and then by Soviets, even on bigger extent. And of course, for us, it's very important to reflect and to understand what shall we do in order to show how important it is to live together peacefully. And I would like to stress some very important issues. First of all, I think it's very important to show that our heritage, history, and the very, very nice and very sad pages of our history is not history of them, Jews. It's our history. I think if we want to educate our people, our young generation, that we have to respect everyone, we first of all have to show that there is no them and us. And so I think it's very important is, again, to preserve the heritage, both material heritage and also preservation of spiritual heritage as well. And for material heritage, for example, before World War II, we had 135 synagogues in Vilnius, 135. Now we have one existing synagogue because Jewish community is very small. One was just restored, so second one is coming also on the stage. And one great synagogue, we also have attempts to reconstruct it, to show the site and to show how important it was and how important it is. So again, this cultural heritage is important. Cemeteries are very, very important for Jewish culture, very important, even more important than for Christian or other cultures. And for us, we do have a situation where when, of course, Nazis were destroying them, but Soviets destroyed them even more after World War II. For us, it's very important to show that we do respect this heritage, even if it's not according to the understanding of today's Christian tradition. We do show much bigger respect to Jewish cemetery, and this is a very important message to Jewish communities and also to Lithuanian community and to other communities. Preservation of spiritual heritage. Again, we have a problem. We've had a very strange narrative, not showing great Jewish thinkers who live in Vilnius at all. For us, it's very important, again, to show the richness of the spiritual heritage. So it's like erecting monuments to people who lived there, who created there, who were big thinkers. This is important for us, and this is what we're doing a lot with that. I mean, erecting monuments and other things. Then, of course, the remembrance of the Holocaust. And I think in this case, we have to show some very important lessons to other European countries, because we, as many cities in Northern and Central Europe, which were occupied twice by two different forces during World War II. We were occupied by Soviets, then by Nazis, and then by Soviets again. And I think that it's very important to stress that during this World War II, Jewish nation was persecuted by both forces. Of course, 90% of all Jews were killed by Nazis. But when for us, for Lithuanians, and for many people who were occupied both by Soviets and by Nazis, it's very difficult to understand that the persecution of Jews started by Soviets. In 1940, when people started to send people to Siberia, the percentage of Jews sent to Siberia was bigger than the percentage of Lithuanians. And I think it's a very important and strong message, because if you think that Soviets were like pro-Jewish and Nazis were anti-Jewish, sometimes you may be misled by different examples, and it may bring you to very difficult, to strange conclusions and to some fights which are not worth fighting. Then, of course, zero tolerance for collaborators with the Holocaust. And
Mayor,
again, it's not a secret when, yeah.
Well, I want to just sort of pause there and thank you for that reminder. Once again, we see, as with so many cities, especially across Europe, that the integration of what happened in the past and the present is so key to what happens going forward in the future to really try to quell anti-Semitism. Mayor Šimashus, thanks so much for that. And listen along with us as we move on from Lithuania over to North America, another important example of what's going on today in the field of anti-Semitism. Toronto is actually home to the largest Jewish community in all of Canada, a country that has seen record levels of anti-Semitic incidents in recent years. Toronto Mayor John Tory is with us today for his take on what exactly can be done to stem that troubling trend.
Hello, I'm John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto. You know, Toronto is a city that has a Jewish history going back literally centuries, and it's a history that's filled with big contributions made by people of the Jewish faith in every single area of city life. But that hasn't stopped anti-Semitism from being as much a sad but real part of life throughout the history of the Jewish community in our city, starting back in the 1900s and probably before. Now, it did start to change with the election of our first Jewish mayor in the 1950s. This helped to lead Toronto and Ontario to becoming human rights leaders. It has been a fundamental part of who we are, and it's been carried through to this day, so that you have, for example, happening in 2021, the police budget with a zero increase, but an increase within that to the hate crimes unit, where anti-Semitism is still at the top of the list, together, for example, with anti-Black racism. 2021 also marked the beginning of a campaign against anti-Semitism on the part of our city, working with Jewish community leaders to make sure that people understood anti-Semitism, how wrong it was, and how much we have to take it on together. And by the same token, 2021 is also the year that we're taking on anti-Asian racism as a city, as a people living here in the city of Toronto, in light of what's happened in the wake of COVID-19. And this has involved us reviewing policies on permits and grants and ads and so on to ensure compliance right across the board with anti-discrimination policies. Why are we doing this now? Well, because the fact is that acts of polarization and discrimination are increasing again, including anti-Semitism, but not limited to that. And they're increasing again following the global trend and the evolution of social media. This is just not who we are in the 21st century. Here in Toronto, I don't think anybody in the world is that way, but we, especially in the most diverse city in the world, we have a special responsibility as we work to becoming the most inclusive city in the world. But we have a special responsibility to stand up and to speak up and to show up. That's what I say all the time, you know, that when you're a leader and you're going to stand up and speak up and show up, you have to do all three. And I do that even for incidents which seem to be of lesser magnitude, because you know what? There is no such thing as a small incident or a small event when it comes to discrimination or when it comes to the stigmatization of a people. And you know what else I talk about quite often, which is that one community can learn from the experiences of another. And I'm trying to enlist, and it's not that difficult to do, because people want to come forward from the Jewish community to help people like from our Muslim community with the stigmatization that they are facing today, which is very similar to what happened in the early days of the Jewish community, and if we're being honest, still happens to some extent today. So I think it puts a responsibility in front of all of us, and I'm so glad that you're gathering to talk about this and to do something about it. It's a responsibility to educate, because we have to understand the history and the reality of what's going on today. It's a responsibility to advocate, because if you don't speak up, then nobody is going to be aware of the magnitude of these issues, the prevalence of these kinds of issues, even if it is confined to social media, and we know that it's not. And then, of course, there's the final and most important responsibility, and that is to act, to educate, to advocate, and to act. And you are acting by being present at the seminar that you're attending. I thank you very much, all the organizers, for putting it together. We don't presume to have perfected things here in the city of Toronto, but we work hard at it every day because it's a part of our Canadian values. It's a part of who we are. And I think it is going to help us to make Toronto a better place. And in turn, all the work that you're doing is going to help to make the world a better place, free of anti-Semitism, free of other kinds of racism and the kind of behavior that we just can't accept in a world that needs more love, quite frankly, in order to make sure we live the lives that everybody is entitled to live. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for inviting me to be a small part of it, and good luck with the rest of your discussions.
Thanks so much, Mayor Tory. Hopefully this exchange of ideas will help take all of that a step further. And thanks so much, of course, for your work in combating prejudice.
All right, we are going to the Netherlands. Amsterdam is a large and diverse European capital, but it's seen a fair share of hate crimes in recent times. We're now going to hear from Amsterdam Mayor Femke Halsema about what she is doing to protect religious minorities in her city, including Jews. Mayor Halsema, welcome.
Dear colleagues, every inhabitant of Amsterdam has the right to freedom and safety. In Amsterdam, we are obliged to do everything we can to protect our Jewish community. We praise and protect the precious part they are of our collective history, culture, and literature. It is sad, but we still need to be vigilant, not only for Jewish, but also Muslim and other minorities that are at risk. In Amsterdam, we invest in the protection of synagogues, mosques, and other religious buildings. Nevertheless, protection is not enough. Also, words matter. As the mayor of Amsterdam, I have a responsibility to fight the sources of structural racism and institutional discrimination. This year in Amsterdam, a monument designed by Liebeskind will be unveiled with the names of 102,220 victims of the Holocaust. As Dutch writer Arnon Grunberg rightfully stated on our National Commemoration Day, it is not a responsibility to undo the past, but a responsibility to emphasize that the past is not finished yet. We should not forget how the Holocaust began, with a joke, with fake news, in classrooms, at work, in the streets, and we should be vigilant of those first steps. And do not forget that before Auschwitz, there were elections, administrative directives, willing and less willing helpers, most of whom had never visited a concentration camp, never killed anyone. And it is important to note that after the war, it was not only the Germans who said they knew nothing about the whole thing, that they were only following orders. The helpers of the Dutch police, Dutch railroad employees, and even the civil servants of the city of Amsterdam had similar claims. We cannot afford to live without the reasonable fear that among us, that even we could be future perpetrators or their helpers. Just as important, we need to be hopeful and encouraged by acts of bravery, like the strike in February 1941 in Amsterdam. This strike, in the middle of Nazi occupation by the people of Amsterdam, is considered to be the only mass protest in Europe against the Nazi roundup of the Jews. This strike is one of the reasons Amsterdam launched a campaign against racism and discrimination. And with this campaign, we make a statement. We are all responsible. All Amsterdammers should stand up for each other, say something, intervene, not be a silent bystander. Words matter. We have commissioned studies into the effect of racism, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Muslims, and against LGBTIQ+ persons, on the well-being of those people involved. In the coming period, these studies are the basis for broad city conversations about the experience of discrimination, anti-Semitism and racism. Words matter. Anti-Semitism and being critical of the state of Israel are not the same. You are allowed to criticize the policy of the Netherlands. People should also be allowed to criticize the policy of the State of Israel. However, if you equate criticizing an act of the State of Israel with hatred of Jews, then you deceive those people who experienced the horror of real discrimination. If someone says, for political gain, that a legal investigation by the International Criminal Court of a state actor in Gaza is anti-Semitism, then you deeply undervaluate the meaning of anti-Semitism and the dark outcomes of anti-Semitism nowadays and in history. As Angela Merkel recently stated, language is the harbinger of action. As leaders, we bear extra responsibility to set a good example, to make sure the word does not become poison. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor Halsema, for your commitment to religious tolerance in your city. Norit?
Well, let's jump from there over to the French capital, home to Europe's largest Jewish community. Paris has seen some shocking incidents of anti-Semitic violence in recent years that we've all heard about. Those include the Hyper Kasher kosher supermarket attack and the murders of Sarah Halimi and Mireille Knoll. Last month, the city took an important step in the fight against anti-Semitism when its city council adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism. Joining us today, we have Paris Deputy Mayor Hermano Sanchez-Ruivo. On behalf of Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, Deputy Mayor Ruivo, thanks so much for being with us. I'll turn it over to you.
Bonjour, merci. Dear colleagues, on behalf of Anne Hidalgo, Mayor of Paris, I would first like to thank and congratulate Mayor Uwe Becker from Frankfurt for undertaking this delicate but essential task of convening this summit. His wish, our, is that at the end of this convention, we shall be able to gather a broad coalition of mayors from the 5 continents who pledge to actively fight anti-Semitism in their cities. If you agree to launch such an initiative, you can be sure that Mayor Hidalgo will take her share in spreading the message that, yes, the rise of anti-Semitism is a reality we must tackle now and with the utmost dedication. As cities are the place where many issues affecting the everyday life of citizens are being solved, mayors need to speak up against anti-Semitism and take all necessary decisions that can help eradicate this plague. What is at stake here now is not only the safety of our fellow Jewish citizens who live in our respective cities. It is also the cohesiveness of our communities and their inclusiveness, so that Jews do not fear to be openly, outspokenly Jewish in their everyday life. Nowadays and around the world, Jews do not only have to face the threat of terror attacks, they are also victims of smearing campaigns, assaults, desecration of their communal buildings, and intimidation in the streets. This has to stop now, because we do not want our Jewish communities to fear that the past may repeat. Let's face the truth. The old style, traditional anti-Semitism of the far right is still alive and dreadful. But we now have to face new anti-Jewish stereotypes that have become commonplaces and are shaped by other ideologies. Anti-Zionism is one of them, and Paris fully acknowledges it. Lately, as you said, Mayor Hidalgo made it clear that while everyone is entitled to criticize the Israeli government, boycotting Israeli goods is a criminal offense, and refusing the right of the Jewish people to have their own state is a form of anti-Semitism. This is why the City Council of Paris voted last month to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism set by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that includes this reality. Mayor Hidalgo is proud of this achievement that moves towards a more modern understanding of what kind of anti-Semitism we shall fight, and she will stand by your side to go further ahead in combating it. Thank you.
A reminder that anti-Semitism comes from all ends of the political spectrum and that it comes in many forms, as you mentioned, not just terror attacks necessarily, but also other smaller level things that happen every day that we don't necessarily hear about. Deputy Mayor Ruivo, thanks so much for that.
All right, we are turning to Latvia. Latvia is another Baltic nation that once had a large Jewish population that was mostly wiped out during the Holocaust. And we're now welcoming the mayor of the Latvian capital of Riga, Martin Stakis, to reflect on the history and talk about contemporary Jewish life in his city.
Yeah, dear delegates, I'm truly grateful for the given opportunity to address you today. The people of Latvia have understood it is possible to raise a new, tolerant generation only when you look bravely into the eyes of the past horrors. And these are not my words. They were said in 2013 in Riga by Shimon Peres, the great statesman of Israel. This was the first visit of the president of Israel in Latvia. And this visit is still the vivid memory of many people of Riga. Visiting Riga, his main message was not the economic cooperation or cooperation in the field of education, as many politicians appeal to. No, Peres arrived in our city with a much deeper universal message. He invited Latvia and Israel as two small countries to build together an era where hatred, intolerance, and anti-Semitism are not existent. That time, the president of Latvia was moved by these words, and afterwards he shared this emotion with the people who gathered by the Freedom Monument of Latvia. And it was a special human moment in our city of Riga and in the foot of our main symbol of Latvian independence. And afterwards, President Peres opened the Memorial Museum of Janis Lipke, a savior of Jews who has been honored with the title Righteous Among the Nations. And I'm truly happy that now this Memorial Museum has become a small but important part of the public life of Riga. It's a place where exhibitions and performances inviting discussions are organized, a place where people talk about current events and difficult topics, about both history and modern days. In Riga, the remembrance of the Holocaust is gaining momentum. The Genocide Remembrance Day in the 1st of July is connected with the date when the great choral synagogue of Riga was burned down. By the ruins of the synagogue, we can now find a monument devoted to Janis Lipke, mentioned before, the other saviors of Jews in Latvia. Remembrance of the November 13 is becoming increasingly active. This was the date when Nazis and local collaborators performed the mass murder of the forest of Rumbola. In the recent years, we commemorate this event by placing candles at the Freedom Monument of Latvia. And it is important to note that this fact of remembrance was initiated not by politicians, but by the members of society, the simple people, active people from Riga who thought that it's essential to remember the massacre of Rumbola and to commemorate these people who were killed. And now more and more people get involved in this remembrance of this tragic date. They create corridors of light with candles by the Freedom Monument of Latvia. In the recent years, I also personally go to the place to place a candle by the Freedom Monument on this date. And I was truly honored by the last year during this commemoration, even I got the chance to meet renowned intellectual, historian of Riga, founder of Museum Jews in Latvia, and a Holocaust survivor, Mārģeris Vestermans. Vestermans, in one of the interviews, acknowledged that he feels truly blessed to have experienced a day when in Riga candles are placed by the Freedom Monument to remember the mourning of Jews. And it is a big step forward. Yes, I have been asked by Latvians or Russians living here, should we remember Holocaust or speak about it at all? And my answer is always the same. This remembrance is essential because the people who were killed were our people. They were not some strangers from afar. They were citizens of Latvia who took part in the fight for the independence of Latvia. They were inhabitants of Riga who took part in the public, economic, cultural life of our country and also in our city, just like the rest of the population of Latvia. And almost 100,000 Jews lived in Latvia before the war, and half of them resided here in Riga. And they were our people who were destroyed in the Holocaust. And Riga lost most of its Jewish culture as well. So Jewish history in Latvia, in Riga, is 400 years long. Riga is the birthplace of philosopher Jesse Berlin, champion of the chess Mikhail Tal, and many other remarkable Jews. And this history continues. Sadly, no, there's only 5,000 Jews in Latvia. And at the same time, I'm happy that active life of the Jewish community takes place in Riga. We have a Jewish school, synagogue, and Jewish museums. And Holocaust Museum operates in Riga, and Riga City Council has granted their premises to it. Yes, hatred, intolerance toward the other, anti-Semitism still exists, and evil also exists in Riga. And this is why obligation as a mayor of the Riga and state obligation of Latvia is to create a safe and tolerant environment for all people and all nations. The history of Jews is also the history of Riga. And Riga was, is, and will be the home of Jews. And it has to be a safe home. Thank you for your attention.
The history of Jews is also the history of Riga. What an important sentence. And it's very exciting to hear that, you know, average people in society are now taking part in commemorating these important events. All right, we're turning to the United Kingdom now. We have Lord John Mann joining us, who serves as an independent advisor to the British government on anti-Semitism and is a member of CAM's advisory board. Lord Mann is a leading advocate in the UK for the adoption of the IHRA anti-Semitism definition. So, Lord Mann, welcome. Tell us a bit about your success in promoting the IHRA definition in the UK and why it's important for cities to adopt it.
It's not possible to deal with a hatred if you can't identify exactly what it is. And so the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is incredibly powerful in giving a benchmark about what is anti-Semitism. And we've used it very effectively. In fact, there is no major city in the country that hasn't adopted the IHRA definition. We're moving now beyond the cities to the small towns and the rural areas, and we're getting the overwhelming majority of those municipalities to adopt IHRA as well. And so all our big cities, London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, Cardiff, they've all adopted the IHRA definition. But as well, we're getting all the universities to adopt the IHRA definition, and we're getting all the football clubs to adopt the IHRA definition. So if we take the city of Manchester, every part of the municipality, the mayor, the 2 Premier League football clubs, the 4 universities have all adopted IHRA. And that means practically we can do some real work, educational work, preventative work, tackling anti-Semitism online, by weaving between the different institutions. And so when one takes action, another can take action alongside. And I think that provides a very powerful alliance. So every city should be congratulated where they've adopted the definition, and every other city and every other mayor should do likewise.
Well, other than adopting the IHRA definition, as you've been talking about, on several different levels, what measures do you think that mayors and municipal governments, both in the UK and for that matter elsewhere, should actually implement to fight anti-Semitism and protect their own Jewish communities?
Well, we need practical solutions. Let me give you one way in which this will work to be practical. So we are using software to identify the racists online. We can do that with a football club. If we do that with a football club, the football club can ban the anti-Semites from the stadium. They can ban them from membership. They can ban them from receiving merchandising. And they can re-educate those who are prepared to be re-educated with us. But it needs the city education to assist in the education. And if all we do is ban them, then we have the same anti-Semites wandering the streets of the city, unable to go to football. Well, that punishes them. But if we have the city authorities and football as one example working together, then if football can identify some anti-Semites who use football as the way of putting across their hatred, then we can help the city, because those same people are a problem in the city. And so practical cooperation extends our ability to do things. And I think football is a good example. You know, we politicians, we of course have some reach, but something like football has a much wider reach. And it's only one example, but I think it's a good example. And cities need to be in the middle of this. And the mayor with wisdom, such as those here today, will choose to be so. And may I say, from our perspective, how vital it is to see this initiative to bring the mayors together. And our great thanks to the organisers and to Mayor Becker for their leadership in this. This is a really significant initiative, and we in the United Kingdom, we can learn a lot from participating within it. So you have our full backing and our active participation in this work.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Lord Mann. We're now going to go to the United States. Greg Fischer is the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, and he's been a prominent voice speaking out against anti-Semitism. So, Mayor Fischer, welcome to our summit. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in the U.S. and around the world, and there have even been some incidents in your home state of Kentucky in the past year. Now, how big of a role do you think mayors and municipal governments should play in fighting anti-Semitism, and what practical steps can be taken at the municipal level to do so?
Well, greetings and good afternoon to everybody from the States here. Thanks, Mayor Becker, for pulling us together here, and hello to my colleagues around the world. Look, mayors own the secular pulpit in our cities. So everything that we should start talking with should be about universal values, and universal values of kindness, compassion, love. We're all born with that as little babies, and somehow too many of us lose that throughout our life. So if we can start with the common heart that we all have, then we can get into secondary differences like religion or political affiliation. But I believe our job so much is to remind people that we're all in this together, regardless of how we're ever looking at things. And any type of hatred is inadmissible, is wrong, it's repugnant, it's morally incorrect, it's economically bad, it's bad for public safety. There's no upside to any type of hatred that takes place in our cities. So mayors have the pulpit to talk about that on a day in and day out basis. In terms of the United States Conference of Mayors, we represent about 90% of the country's population. We speak with one voice, Democrat, Republican, Independent, against anti-Semitism. And it's just important that the citizens understand that. Hate crimes are on the rise in America, especially during the last 4 years. Hopefully during these past 50 days or so, things are settling off somewhat here for us. But it's important that every leader, regardless of what their position is, whether it's the President of the United States or a council person at the local level, speak out against this. And when we have opportunities in our city, if hate does come up for us to rally as a city, as we've done several times around Muslim injustice at a mosque or Hindu temple, so that people see us front and center against this fight, and anti-Semitism certainly is at the center of that.
Now, what are the best ways that mayors can raise awareness of anti-Semitism issues, and what types of organizations should municipal governments partner with to combat hate and promote religious tolerance in an effective manner?
I think on the local basis, each of us should be involved in our interfaith activity. Louisville is a proud home of interfaith activity. We're the home of Muhammad Ali. We're the home of the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis. Thomas Merton had his famous epiphany here. So our Center for Interfaith Relations is a hub for the community's intellectual activity, social activity as well. So we can just see everybody, regardless, again, of skin color or faith, as all of us with, we say, many faiths, one heart. So I would say get very active with your interfaith community. And then secondly, from a national basis here in the States, we're partners, our cities are partners with the American Jewish Committee, where we can have different programs that we're rolling out, common language that we're using to combat hate as well. So individual activity for your city, and then national activity with the American Jewish Committee.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Mayor Fischer. Nurit?
Well, let's jump from there all the way back to Europe, because Jewish history in the Andalusian city of Malaga in southern Spain dates back millennia. The Jews were expelled 500 years ago, but in recent decades, the ancient community has seen a revival. Their mayor, Francisco de la Torre, is here today to speak to this past. Once again, we hear about the past and look to the future of the Jewish residents of his city. Welcome, Mayor. If you can go ahead and unmute, we'll just double check that we can hear you okay.
Microphone. Yes.
There we go.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have with you. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organization for this timely and necessary initiative. Thank you, special thank you to Uwe Becker for the initiative. I am honored to have the opportunity for Spain to be represented at this meeting, where mayors of Europe and America embark on a common endeavor to look to the face of the goals of anti-Semitism and to launch a new global coalition of mayors committed to the fight against prejudice and hatred in all its forms. Because while combating anti-Semitism and any form of hatred are problems that are often debated only at the national or international level, they actually mainly affect local communities. Malaga is a cosmopolitan, diverse, and welcoming city which has made the respectful coexistence between the different its hallmark. A city in whose value framework there is no place for intolerance of any kind. A city that has had a training forum of religious pluralists for 3 years, in which representatives of 10 religious confessions collaborate and share proposals and contributions for the common good. A city in whose squares the Auschwitz survivor, Violet Friedman, is honored, and in which the anti-tolerance movement speak up about anti-Semitism in school projects. A city in which we are precisely celebrating in 2021 the millennium of the birth of a universal son of Malaga, the poet, rabbi, philosopher, and writer Solomon Ingabirol, an example of knowledge, interculturalism, and progress. The Jewish community was established in the 11th century and had its maximum splendor in medieval times. Today's is a count up to 1,500 people. Since 2004, work have been carried out for the recovery and rehabilitation of the Jewish quarter, through which a Mudejar Tower restored in 2008 and a new square that connects Alcazarilla and Granada Street and La Aduana, Alcazaba, and the Roman Theater with the Picasso Museum and the Plaza de la Merced, opened in December 2013, and in which the installation of a Sephardic synagogue and museum by the Israeli community of the Malaga is planned. To address the problem, it is essential to have a unique definition, and the European Union has already required all member states through a unanimous Council resolution to adopt the definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and to take legislative action in the face of Europe's growing wave of anti-Semitism. Institutions are obliged to pursue any hate speech, and we must be able to separate loyal criticism from the questioning of the Israeli state's very existence, which is what beats under modern anti-Semitism. Thanks a lot.
All right, Malaga Mayor de la Torre, thanks so much for being with us. And just a reminder of how unique this event really is. Before we come towards the end of our plenary session, that, you know, with all due respect to the higher level officials around the world, it really is the mayors who are on the ground dealing firsthand with the communities and with tragedies as they happen and how to heal them. Well, we'll go ahead and begin to move towards the end, as I mentioned, of the plenary session to right here in Israel, where we are speaking from. Chaim Bibas is the head of the country's Federation of Local Authorities and the mayor of the city, Modi'in Maccabeim Re'ut. Mayor Bibas, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And let's just start off with your work in the city and at the Federation itself. I mean, how often have you actually had to deal with issues related to anti-Semitism?
First of all, I would like to thank you about everything, and thanks to the host, to the Uwe Baker, my friend. We promote this thing a lot of period and years together, and I do believe this is a time. Of course, I'm the only speaker, the only Israeli speakers now, but I'm very proud that a lot of mayors from all over the world come together to promote this important and wonderful thing. So as mayor of Modi'in Maccabeim Re'ut, I'm directly responsible for our resident, and as chairman of the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel, I'm directly responsible for all of the 257 municipalities in Israel. As a result, all the 9 million residents in Israel are represented, and for us, they are all equal. Mayors are elected directly by the people, and we have to serve everyone equally. Equality is the basis for unity and for preventing hate and anti-Semitism. Now, while some national government may condone anti-Semitism, it is at the local level where this ugly phenomena is most damaging, because we are handling the relevant services, whether it is education, legislation, or enforcement. This is an issue which starts locally, and if not stopped, spreads nationally, and then, of course, internationally. Our role as mayors demand us that we must act on the local level to stamp out hatred and racism, no matter its form.
So you are speaking broadly about the role of mayors. So what more do you think that you and other Israeli mayors should actually play in combating global anti-Semitism outside of Israel? I mean, how can Israeli mayors actually help their counterparts, many of whom are listening, around the world?
Well, first and foremost, we can offer experience and tools that we have learned. First and foremost, we must push for a better education on anti-Semitism, not only in schools, but at the local level. As mayors, we have the opportunity to make connections with other mayors from around the world who we can help in making a real impact in their communities. Secondly, we must demand legislation defined anti-Semitism in order for us to prevent it. As Israeli mayors, it is our duty to call on our partners to accept the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. If we do not define anti-Semitism, it is almost impossible to fight it. Finally, we must encourage proper enforcement against anti-Semitism attacks and incidents. Anti-Semites must know that acting out against Jews will not go unpunished. It is also important that as Israeli mayors, we use our position to offer support in fighting anti-Semitism online. Anti-Semitism on social media is a great danger. We did it in our education system in Israel. It is easy to spread hate online, and as a startups nation, we have the proper cyber solution which can help to stop this online. I do believe if we take the technology and take the knowledge and of course the municipalities and educational system, we can fight against it.
Right. I think online anti-Semitism and online hate in general is something that many have found is even more difficult to address than that on the ground. Mayor Bibas, thanks so much for being with us. And well, that will move to our final plenary session from Latin America. We're pleased to be joined by the intendant of the Uruguayan capital of Montevideo, Carolina Jose, whose city is home to a sizable Jewish community.
Carolina, do we have you?
All right, go ahead.
Oh, there we go.
If you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, there we go. We hear you well now. Go ahead.
Yes, I wasn't able to do that, but now you are listening to me, isn't it?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I am honored to participate in this important meeting. I think I would like to have the opportunity to express what we think and what we feel about this fight against anti-Semitism. Let's remember that on January 27 of 2020, during the special session of the UN General Assembly, in order to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration and extermination camp, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "We must call things by its name. There is a global crisis of anti-Semitic hatred, a constant wave of attacks against Jews, their institutions, their places of worship, and their goods. It can take," Guterres said, "it can take new forms, it can spread with new techniques, but it's the same old hatred against which we can never lower our guard." And we think that cities as urban landscapes, but above all human landscapes, are not alien to this phenomenon, and we, to whom citizens have entrusted us with the responsibility of governing them, must keep, as Guterres said, our guard up. We all remember the brave gesture of the German Chancellor Willy Brandt as he knelt before the monument in memory of the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto. And that gesture that occurred on July the 12th of 1970 is a historical milestone, not only for Germany, Poland, or Israel, but for the humanity as a whole. It should also be remembered, I think, that before being the head of the government of his country, Willy Brandt had been mayor of Berlin between 1957 and 1962. The same place with the most spies per square meter in the world, and from 1961 divided by a wall. So this was a very, very big gesture. Remembering the Holocaust of the Jewish people, the most horrific hate crime of the 20th century, is without a doubt a moral, political, and cultural imperative for all who consider themselves humanists, regardless of their ideology, religion, or political position. Fighting anti-Semitism, a persistent retrograde plague, one of the most recurrent manifestations of modern racism, is another humanist imperative, obviously closely linked to the memory of the Holocaust. In Montevideo, we have a memorial inaugurated in 1994 that gives account of our condemnation of the Holocaust, our tribute to its victims, our, let's say, never again to such horror, and our rejection of anti-Semitism. But the testimony, being important, is not enough. The keeping our word up that Guterres said, more than a statement, we think, is a collective and permanent construction of each and every one, every day, in all areas. A construction that is also called freedom, democracy, citizenship, justice, inclusion, equality, non-discrimination of any kind. A fight against anti-Semitism that not integrate these principles and implement lines of actions to make them concrete is not a real fight against it. Surely it is something else. We think that municipalities and local governments, beyond their diversity and perhaps at the same time for the same reason, are fundamental space and areas in this construction. Right. They are much more than a territory with people on top or an administration. I think they are or should be spaces for meeting and integration and schools of democracy. And above all, they must have people as their roots and horizon. Beautiful. Let me took here. Pardon?
Well, with that, we want to pause here to get to our next part of this special event, the special conference, which is an opportunity to hear from several people at once in our panel discussions. Thanks so much to Intendant Jose for that perspective from Montevideo.